He was charming, he was polite, and he was the perfect gentleman, at least on paper. But behind that big bushy moustache that was well overdue a trim, and that ever so polite smile that he would parade, Henri Landru was a man who lured women into his home, and into a fate so horrifying that the entirety of Paris would shiver when the truth finally came out. He didn't just kill, he vanished them into the fire, ashes, and the silence. For years, no one suspected a thing, until one day when the smell of smoke gave his crimes away. This is the story of France's most infamous seducer and the women who trusted him with their lives. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. As you can see from today's video title, the intro, and possibly the thumbnail, we are travelling over to Paris, the city of love, or in this case, the city of horror. We are going to dive into some absolutely batshit crazy details today, but before we do, if you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper, and one day I decided I'm going to hop on the internet and I'm going to yap about true crime. And now I find myself doing it twice a week, every single week, on a Wednesday and Sunday. So if true crime is your jam, I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on, because, well, like I said, I'm here for you twice a week, every single week, and it's free. Any details you need regarding me, myself, and I, any details of products used on my face today, they will all be listed down below in the description, alongside my social media handles, my Instagram and my TikTok. Don't forget to leave your case suggestion in the comments down below. I would also just like to give a disclaimer that if you hear any rain, wind, hailstones, the UK is currently going through Storm Amy, and Amy is a ferocious gal, let me tell you. She's going for it. But enough about me, more about the case. So without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the horrifying, bone-chilling case of Henri Landru. Oh wait, that rhymed. Anyway, let's go. So today we can all be very excited because we are heading over to Paris. Oh yes, we are going over to Paris. Actually, no wait, I should say, oh oui, we are going over to Paris. That means yes in French, I think, but I don't know. And as excited as I am to head over to Paris, the land of love, it's also going to be the land of horror today. We have a huge POS that we're going to discuss. And let me tell you, Henri Landru, I'm honestly so bad at accents, and I'm so bad at pronouncing things. I can barely speak English, so the fact that we're over in France today is worrisome to me. But Henri Landru, can we just, like, is anyone else seeing what I'm seeing? It's very much giving just made of hair. From here down, his hair. He very much gives off like mad scientist, like very Albert Einstein like. And I mean, no disrespect to little Albert, R.I.P., great man, great theories. But anyway, Henri Landru, he was born on April the 12th of 1869, and he was born in Paris of France. April the 12th. 2 days after my own damn birthday. The audacity of this man and his wiry hair. But that makes him an Aries, like myself, and you know, as we always say in the comments, I'm not claiming him. I'm sorry, we are not claiming him. There is not one bit of Aries about this man. He was said to be the proud offspring of a very perfectly ordinary, hard-working, working-class family. So he was born to his father, Julien Landru, and he worked as a furnace stoker, which I never realised was a job. Stoking fires. That's what that is, right? And later on, he would spend his time bossing many people around in a factory. Now, when we come to Henri's mother, her name was Florie Henriquel, and she spent most of her time at home. She did work as a seamstress, but she was very much living in the 2020s. Work from home life. Love to see it. Now, Julien and Florie, they were both heavily devout Catholics, and they were so devout, it was really the only thing they could talk about, even to their son Henri. Let's just say this made family dinners very awkward, because no one cared about how your day went. It was very much like, have you said your prayer? Is your rosary in order? Once they got all of that out of the way, they just spent their dinners judging everyone else. And there would always be something that they could tell their children off about. When Henri was young, he would receive his schooling from a Catholic institution on Ile Saint Louis, and he apparently took his studies very, very seriously. He would dutifully serve as an altar boy and then also as a sub-deacon. And I know what you're thinking. Anna, this isn't the resume that we would usually expect to see. This isn't the resume of someone who would later be famed for charming women not only out of their wallets, but out of their lives. But hey, I guess everyone's path twists somewhere. So after his graduation, he dabbled very briefly in the world of architecture. He spent some time working in an architect office, but this just didn't seem to be his true calling. It wasn't really the thing he enjoyed. He never really thrived as much as he thought he would. So he was like, you know what? I need to find something else. So by the age of 20, Henri would find himself stuck within the military grind. And whilst this would appear to be a sort of all work, no play situation, that wasn't the case, because young Henri, he was able to find himself a love interest. And he didn't have to look far. And what I mean by him not having to look far is he just kind of glanced over his left shoulder at his cousin, Mary Catherine. He's keeping it in the family. I mean, at least it's not a sister or a brother, but you know, cousins, it's not really the done thing, but different times. So this pair, they were, you know, shacking up, having a good old jolly time. And then one day, Marie Catherine, she comes over to Henri and she tells him, I'm pregnant. And you are the only one that I am having sexual relations with, so you are the father of this child. And Henri, he steps up to the mark, he steps up to the plate, and he decides, well, I better marry you then. He didn't want to, but he felt that he had to. So the pair, they get married on October the 7th of 1893, and the family attended, they had all the approval, and they would welcome their little girl, Marie. But life didn't slow down when he became a father. He was very much occupied with his military service, and he had been obligated to carry out a 4-year stint in San Quentin back in 1889. So we're kind of going back and forward in the timeline, but just stick with. All of these details are important to the story. Now, he would finally get out of his military service in 1894, but that was not before he was able to rise up to a deputy quartermaster. Once he gets out of his military service, he returns to Paris, back to Marie Catherine, his cousin and devoted wife, and they would expand on their family, having a son, Maurice, in 1894, and then a daughter, Suzanne, in 1896, and then Charles in 1900. They were busy. They enjoyed themselves. By the time Charles was born, it would appear that Henri was a full-time husband, or, you know, at least in theory. Now, life from the 1890s onwards, for the Landrus, it was described as being modestly chaotic. Marie Catherine, she would scrub laundry for a living, and Henri always seemed to be busy, but he was never really doing much. Like, he was fleeting from job to job. He could never ever make up his mind what he wanted to do. One week, he's an accountant. The next week, he's a furniture salesman. The week after that, a map maker. Then he's an assistant toy maker, and it's rinse and repeat. He just goes back and forth. And Marie Catherine, despite Henri never having a stable life, stable income for his family, she would always paint him as this perfect husband, at least in the beginning. I will say, however, she never ever denied the fact that Henri also had a wandering eye. Mary Catherine would later say that Henri had always been a skirt chaser. Now, in terms of where his life of crime had stemmed from, it is said that the earliest criminal activity that Henri participated in was when an architectural firm that he had worked for, apparently like the boss or director, had made off across country to America with the office savings, and this meant that Henri never received his payment. So if this story is true, this would mean that Henri had started to dip his toe into, you know, the world of fraud in an attempt to recoup his cash, you know, from innocent people, because who else are you going to blame? Don't blame the guy that ran off with the money, just go after the innocent. However, other people have stated that it was likely that Henri never had any money stolen off him and he just wanted to be a lousy thief. But either way, it is around this point in Henri's life where these seeds of his charming but deadly persona were starting to grow. Now, Henri, his flirtation with the world of crime, this started to get real steamy when he decided that he was going to become an inventor. It was around 1898 when Henri would unveil his new creation. It was a motorbike that he called the Landru. But unfortunately for Henri, this wasn't really any sort of like inventive idea. I mean, the motorbike had kind of been done, so it didn't exactly set the world on fire or take the world by storm. But Henri, he wasn't discouraged. He just moved on to the next thing. Henri would meet up with investors and he would basically sweet talk these investors into investing into a factory that didn't quite exist. And it didn't stop there. He kept on hustling with other brilliant flops. A suburban railway scheme here, an automated toy there, each and every single one just collapsing under the weight of its own improbability. And Henri kind of thinks to himself, you know what? I find that when I'm actually inventing stuff, I'm not really making a lot of money. But when I'm defrauding people, I'm making quite a bit of cash. So Henri decides at this point that to be a fraudster was much more lucrative than actually working hard for his money. And this is when he decides, you know, I'm going to go full-time grifter. He would spend years hopping from one scam to the next. And honestly, whilst he's, you know, scam hopping, he would see his family like once a month. But being a family man, that just wasn't on the forefront of his mind. Money was. Defrauding people was. Being a general POS was. Now, his first documented proper brush with the law, this would come in 1904. This is when he would be sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud. This would then be followed by, you know, a cheeky little bank swindle attempt. And then a very suspicious little performance at La Sante prison, which may or may not have been a feigned suicide attempt. But regardless, one thing was clear with Henri from the beginning. The man knew how to put on a show. He was always putting on performance after performance. Now, there would be a doctor called Dr. Charles Vallon. He was a psychiatrist, and he had said that Henri Landru at this point, he was on the frontiers of madness. He had even warned Henri's wife, Marie Catherine, and he had told her that her husband Henri, he had the potential to be dangerously unhinged. A statement that was so understated that it practically screamed, Marie Catherine, you in danger, girl. So, between 1904 and 1914, Henri Landru, he was basically this boomerang of petty crime. He was always getting up to something that was no good. He was constantly cycling in and out of prison for these petty fraudulent crimes. Then in 1909, Henri Landru, he would be caught trying to sweet talk and charm a wealthy widow out of her savings, which was 20,000 francs. Now, he would be caught when he was trying to cash in her certificates. Certificates back then was basically a document that would prove ownership of these financial assets, and you would have to hand over these certificates to release the assets. So yet again, he's out here committing fraud, and this little, you know, misstep, this would land him a 3-year prison sentence in Luce prison. And it is believed by many that this was a point when Henri Landru decided, you know what, if I'm going to be charming widows out their money, or, you know, whoever I possibly can, it's probably better if I don't leave a body behind. Because if this little lady's alive, they can go back to her and get the proof they need to lock me up. But if the little wealthy widow ain't here, no body, no crime. That is exactly what this man thought. And let me tell you, this man would pick up this philosophy like it was his brand new hobby. Anyway, meanwhile, during 1909, when he's locked up in prison for this stint he pulled on the wealthy widow, his mother would pass away. And then just 2 years after he was released, his father, Julian, he would hang himself. And this, of course, crushed Henri. That's his father, it's his mother. He's lost both of them in such quick succession. But apparently, the reason that his father, Julian, had hung himself wasn't because he missed his wife. It was because he couldn't handle the shame that Henri was bringing upon the family. And you would think that Henri would take a step back and think, oh my God, you know, I can't believe I've caused this. I can't believe my dad was so ashamed of the criminal acts that I was committing that he's took his own life. I need to change. I need to be a better person. No, that didn't happen. And actually, this guy would just become worse and worse and worse. To add insult to the familial injury. Marie Catherine, she had later claimed that Henry, he had made off with 12,000 francs that her father had left her specifically for her and the children. So, you know, charming, what a great father figure, robbing money that was meant for his kids and his wife. Then in the winter of 1913 to 1914, he would pull off what was deemed to be his most ambitious pre-war fraud. He had been able to get himself 36,000 francs from a gaggle of investors, claiming again that this was going to be for another factory. Another factory that didn't frickin' exist. As you can imagine, he took off with his large loot of 36,000 plus any inheritance that was left to him. And he was able to do this just before the police were able to crash his party. Then by the late July of 1914, he would be tried again in absentia, marking his 6th conviction. I think he's trying to get in the Guinness Book of World Records. He would be sentenced to 4 years of hard labour, and this was followed by lifelong deportation to New Caledonia. But as you're probably gathering from this moment, Henri Landru, he was quite the Houdini of fraud, shall we say, and he was able to slip through their fingers by using a cocktail of aliases, constant relocation. He was always throwing them off his scent. He effectively became a fugitive just as World War I was rolling onto the stage. It was almost described as being this masterclass in dodging justice, and you can just imagine him smirking away, like the police are like shaking their fists like, oh, how did he get away again? And he's just tee-hee-heeing like Michael Jackson, off to the next location. So then we come to the outbreak of World War I in August of 1914, and this didn't just upend Europe. For Henri Landru, it was like the universe had handed him a get rich and potentially homicidal card. Because with thousands of French men being shipped off to the front lines, or possibly worse, the Lonely Hearts column, it was booming. The Lonely Hearts column had become a gold mine of widows or married women seeking companionship whilst their husband was away and, you know, some potentially not coming home. They were looking for some comfort, maybe a little something, and also financial security, which, you know, Henri Landru, he's not going to offer you that. And Henry, he would be able to take full advantage of these widows and married women looking for company, because for him, he was exempt from service due to his age, his dependence, and probably his little fugitive backdrop that he had set up for himself. And you know, why fight in the trenches when you can just charm and con married widowed women out of their money? So Henry, he very quickly starts placing ads in every single news column he possibly could. He was writing into major papers like Le Journal, and he was describing himself as the perfect widowed father. He said he was 43 years old, he was a widow with 2 children, which is funny because I believe he has 4 or 5, but hey, 2 children. He said that he had a very comfortable income, he was affectionate, serious, and he was also moving in good society. He said that his desire was to meet a widow with a view to matrimony. He really just painted himself as the perfect guy for anyone back then. Now, one of his other ads, and I have to say this is a personal favourite to me, he said he was a 43-year-old widow looking for another widow aged 35 to 40, or any woman who is just unlucky in love. So it's like he has a type, but then he's also like, do you know what? I'll take anyone that's going. Desperation station. And you can imagine at this point, this guy really does seem like the kind of guy that these women are after. So replies, they start flooding in. And honestly, Henri Landru, he would have loved Microsoft Excel because he meticulously catalogues every single reply he's got in a little notebook. It's got the name, the age, the title of the widow, and, you know, her potential. And he would of course prioritise his correspondence by their potential wealth. And it was terrifyingly organised. So some of the things he had wrote in his journal was returned reply posté restante, no money, no reply, returned reply posté restante with initials, probably his assets, reserve, further investigation required. He is literally looking into these women and being like, I'll put you on the back burner just until I work out your financial situation. And those who didn't have property and were deemed propertyless by Henri Landru, they were just disposed of like expired coupons. And honestly, lucky for those women. Henri really seemed to hone in on women who appeared to him to be naive and also flush with cash. And he would take his time. He would ensure that he had gathered all intel he possibly could before he decided to make his move. Because in his mind, he's got to make sure that the risk is worth it. So by December of 1914, Henri Landru, he decides he is going to rent the Villa Hermitage, and this was in Verneuil. This was a charming little hideaway, and it was 35 kilometres northwest of Paris, and this would become the location for his first confirmed murders. And you know how like homes have the signs and it's like beware of the dog? They should have had one that was like, beware of the charming con man, because nothing good would come from this house. So the first known victims of Henri Landru was Jeanne Marie Couchet, who was 39 years old. She was a Parisian lingerie seamstress, and also her son Andre, who was deemed to be around 15 to 17 years old. Jeanne had been widowed in 1909, and this of course had made her the perfect target. Jeanne had first crossed paths with Henri back in 1914, and he was going under one of his many aliases. In this case, it was Raymond Diard. He had claimed that he was a postal inspector or potentially an industrialist that was displaced by the war. And his lies seemed to work because typical Henri, he has this charm, he has the gift of the gab and just enough authority to make it believable. Henri had made promises not only to Jeanne but also her son Andre, promising them financial security, a loving marriage, a happy home, just dangling this carrot in front of them. He even said that he potentially had a government job for young Andre, you know, promising him money, promising him a good career. Now, Jeanne's sister and her brother-in-law, they smelled something fishy from the get-go. They were like, something is up with Diard. When this warning from her sister and brother-in-law had come around, this was actually at the time when Henri Landru, you know, Houdini, he performs his little magic act and he disappeared at the onset of the war. But then he quickly returns once the war, you know, is set up and going, I suppose. And then this is when him and Jeanne cross paths again, and she is very much within his orbit. And it would be by December of 1914, when Henri has purchased this villa, that Jeanne and Andre, they would move in. Young Andre, he was buzzing with anticipation about early military recruitment. He was so unaware of the darkness that his future would hold and the fact that he really would have no future at all. So Jeanne and Andre, they were last seen alive around January the 26th of 1915. Now, soon after this last sighting of them, Henri, there was this thick black smoke coming from his chimney, right? And neighbours, when they got a whiff of this smoke, they said that it smelled rotten. It smelled distinctly of burnt flesh. So they contact the authorities because they think, you know, there's something really weird here. We've not seen the woman and the child and now there's a smell of flesh. It's all very strange. So the police, they rock up. But Henri, he's a smooth talker, let's not forget. And he's able to charm the police. He says, oh, I'm really sorry for like the smoke, the disturbance and the smell. I'm actually burning rubbish, so there probably will be a bit of a stench. And the police were like, alright, that explains it. See you later. But evidently, Jeanne and Andre, they were the cause of that smoke, that smell. Henri was burning their bodies. Now, it was later discovered that Henri, back in June of 1914, he had deposited 5,000 francs, and it would later be discovered that this was actually money of Jeanne's. So then we move on to Henri's next victim, and this would be Thérèse Laborde-Linné. Now, she was a 46-year-old Argentine-born widow, and she was a bit more worldly wise, but also still very vulnerable. She had been estranged from her son and her daughter-in-law, and she would run into Landru around June of 1915. Now, it is believed that Thérèse had met Landru through his May the 1st advertisement within the Lonely Hearts column. And by June the 21st, again, like, it moves very quick. By June the 21st, Thérèse, she's selling her furniture, she's selling all her belongings, and she's announcing to friends and neighbours, I'm off. I'm going to go and move in with my future husband, Henri Landru. Now, she would last be seen gardening in Verneuil Villa, and then she would disappear on June the 26th. I don't know if the guy has a thing about the 26th of the month, but seems to be a favourite right now. And Henri wasted no time. Bearing in mind, she had sold her stuff to move in June the 21st. By June the 26th, she's not been seen again. And Henri very quickly sells her securities and stores the last remaining bits of her own furniture in his garage. And then we come to Marie Angelique Goulian. She was a 51-year-old retired housekeeper, and she had been living near Gare de Lyon. And it turns out that Marie, she had answered the same ad from May the 1st. Now, could this be why there was such a quick turnaround time from Therese moving into the villa to them being murdered and disappearing? Because he had someone else on his radar, Marie Angelique. Now, Marie Angelique, she had just very recently inherited 22,000 francs. Henri literally has dollar signs in his eyes at this point. He's like, oh, I'm about to be richy rich. And this woman, she had bought into Henri's story that he was about to become the consul general to Australia and needed a hostess wife. She had moved into Verneuil on August the 2nd, and she was so excited. She was so excited for this life she was about to build and live, about the potential future husband that she had, not knowing that just 2 days later, she would vanish, never to be seen again. So then Henri, channeling his bureaucracy ninja, he would pose as Marie Angelique's brother-in-law. The reason that he did this was so he could manage her affairs, and he very swiftly withdraws 12,000 francs from her bank account. Now, starting from that very August, there would be this abandoned trunk at a train station. And honestly, it felt like it lay there forevermore because it wasn't looked into until February of 1916. The only reason this would be looked into was because the staff, they noticed that this trunk really started to have a foul odour. And it wasn't just an odour that you would get a whiff of if you walked by it, it was starting to fill the air all around. And do you know why this had this foul odour? This was because it contained the remains of Marie Angelique. She had been completely dismembered and stuffed into this trunk. So then, by late 1915, the neighbours of Verneuil, they are side-eyeing Henri Landru like nothing else on this earth. Because where's all your potential future wives going, Henri? Like, what's going on there? Now, he feels it. He knows that the walls are closing in, and what does he do when things get tough? He runs. So he decides at this point it's time to upgrade the criminal real estate. So in December, he decides that he is going to rent Villa Trique, and this is in the village of Gambais, which is this gloriously isolated little hideaway. It was a perfect house. It had all the privacy he could want, and it had plenty of distance from the neighbours, distance enough that hopefully they wouldn't smell, burning flesh. And of course, Henri, he had to put some things in place in the house to make sure it was fit for murder. He had put in a very large kitchen oven and stocked up on a mountain of coal because, well, how else do you burn dismembered bodies? Now, his first victim in Gambais would be a woman by the name of Berthe Anna Hion. She was a 55-year-old widow from Le Havre, and she had endured just a shocking parade of personal struggles. There was so much tragedy in this woman's life. Her husband, lover, son-in-law, they were all in the army. Her daughter was basically the walking embodiment of heartbreak. And she had answered Landru's second Lonely Hearts ad that was in the paper in the summer of 1915. And Henri, as charming as ever, he convinces Berthe Anna that he wants to move to Tunisia and that she should come with him. They'll make a life for themselves. It's going to be amazing. She should really just sell all her belongings and make it look like she never existed. So, December the 8th, Henri, he buys a return ticket for himself and a one-way ticket for Berthe Anna. And can you believe it? But soon after, Berthe Anna disappeared. And we can absolutely say with 100% confidence that Berthe Anna would have found herself incarcerated in his new oven. Henri Landru, he ends up keeping this charade going. He pretends that Berthe Anna really had moved away. She's sending postcards to friends, to family, moonlighting as this poor woman. Like, he is honestly just the scum of the frickin' earth. The audacity of this man and his weird haircut and his beard and his moustache and his frickin' eyebrows that looks like they are growing so much in an attempt to escape his face. His next victim would be a woman by the name of Anna Colomb. Now, she was a 44-year-old intelligent widow. She had been working as an insurance company typist, and she had some savings tucked away. You know, she was wise with her money. She had saved up 10,000 francs. Now, she did have a partner, but for certain reasons that I'm not entirely sure of, she couldn't marry him. Anna, she was looking at the Lonely Hearts column, and on May the 1st of 1915, she would reply to an ad. An ad placed by none other than the scumbag Henri Landru. And despite a delayed meeting due to Henri having other victims that he had to take care of, Anna very quickly, once she met Henri, preferred him to her previous suitor. She thought they were better suited together. He had more potential. He could offer her more in this life. But she would be so wrong. Her family, from the moment she met Henri, they smelled something rotten about him. But she couldn't see it. She couldn't smell it, because he presented himself as the idyllic man, the idyllic partner. So Anna, she moves to Gambais, and she would be visited by her sister on December the 14th. And then by December the 27th of 1916, Anna would never be seen again. And then we come to Henri Anna Babelais. She was a 19-year-old girl, and she was described as being very pretty but very poor. And it's speculated that she was supplementing her income by doing some casual prostitution. I'm using the word prostitution because that's what was used back then, but of course these days we would say sex worker or sex work. Now, Henri, he would spot and sniff out Adriana when she was crying on a metro platform. And the reason that she had been crying was because she had run away from her family home. She was obviously very scared, very lonely. I mean, after all, she was only a 19-year-old girl, and you know, she's left her family behind. So Anna, she went with Henri. She lived in his rented room for 10 days. After those 10 days, she would get back in contact with her mother and told her mother that she was getting married. Then come March the 29th, she would move into Gambais with Henri. She stayed there for 2 weeks. She learned to ride a bike. She was having the best time. But by April the 12th of 1917, 19-year-old Anna was nowhere to be seen. Prosecutors would later speculate that the reason that Adriana had been killed was because she had seen too much. Either that, or her youth and her energy was just too much for Henri. But Henri, that is probably why you shouldn't go after 19-year-olds when you're in your late 40s. And then we come to Celestine Buisson. She was 47 years old, and devastatingly, she would round out this gruesome season. She was a frugal, trusting, semi-literate widowed housekeeper, and she had around 10,000 francs saved up. Now, she had this from her late husband's hotel business. This was almost like her inheritance after his passing. And again, she had answered Henri Landru's May the 1st ad in 1915. Henri, at this point, he was using the alias of Georges Fremiet. He had corresponded with Celestine. He was very sympathetic toward her. He was, you know, looking after her, trying to look out for her. And then they very quickly got engaged in 1915. However, he would stall for 2 years, and we know this is because there was many victims in between. But he had said, oh, there was like lost documents, and then also these fake business trips that had come up abroad that stalled them being able to marry each other. However, after his previous victim was out of the way, now he could focus his attention on Celestine. So it was by July of 1917 that he came back into this woman's orbit, back to plague this woman's life. He was helping her with her sister's funeral. He was helping doing all the planning, and he even proposed to her again. Celestine thinks she has another chance at love, and of course she wants to be with this man. So she decides, you know what, I'm going to do this for myself. I'm completely smitten. I'm going to move to Paris with this man. And she leaves her son behind with her half-sister, which, do I agree with that parenting strategy, going off into the sunset just to marry someone? No, but it also saved this boy's life. So then on August the 19th, Henri, he buys a very familiar ticket combination. He has a return for himself, but a one-way ticket for Celestine. And would it shock you to hear that Celestine would be confirmed missing on September the 1st of 1917? And Henri's bank soon seen a nice little increase of 1,000 francs. So using the return ticket that he got for only himself, he very quickly returns to Celestine's apartment, and he would flash this forged authorization letter. And he explains that Celestine is running a canteen for US troops in the south. He had then started aggressively selling her furniture, which had earned him the 1,000 francs. Now, by late 1917, it was clear that Henri Landru, he was truly in his groove, and Gambais, this had just become his playground of all things deception, theft, and murder. So then we come to Louise Josephine Jouam. She was a 38-year-old devout Catholic. She had recently just gotten divorced, and she was a dress shop assistant. And she had come across Henri Landru through a marriage bureau in the summer of that year. Now, Henri, of course, he was not operating as himself. He was operating under the alias of Lucien Goulier, and he had initially pitched himself as a war refugee. Now, he very quickly makes his moves on Louise, and Louise at first, she actually resists, and this is to do with religious reasons. Her faith really was an obstacle, but then Lucien decides, well, let's go to Mass together. This could be our thing. We could go to Mass and I'll prove to you that I'm also very into my faith. Which is crazy because I'm pretty sure in your faith, murder is wrong. So they start going to Mass together, and with this, Louise really starts to soften, and she thinks, you know what, maybe this man is also devout. Maybe this is someone I could see my life with. Not knowing that this is just another con act by this scumbag. So then on November the 15th of 1917, Henri gets Louise on the train to Gambais with a one-way ticket, yet again. And as usual, Henri moves quick, and Louise had disappeared sometime between November the 24th and November the 26th. This left Henri 275 francs richer in cash, and then also 1,500 francs richer from Louise's bank account. And he had obtained all of this by November the 30th, because why wait around when you can just rob the dead right away? The dead that you murdered. Next up, we have Anne-Marie Pascal, and Anne-Marie, she was better known as Annette to friends and family. She was known to have this really big love for hats. At the age of 36, she had been divorced, and she was working currently as a dressmaker. Now, it was stated that there was a possibility that Anne-Marie, or Annette, as she was better known, had been moonlighting as a prostitute for some extra income. And apparently, she wasn't really looking for love as much as she was looking for a sugar daddy. So she responds to an ad in La Presse, and this ad that she had responded to belonged to none other than Henri Landru. So Anne-Marie, she very quickly becomes Henri's mistress. But unlike a lot of Henri's victims, Anne-Marie seemed to have intuition, or possibly even just nerves. But days before she vanished, she had confided in her aunt, and she said, I don't know who he is, but I'm scared. When he looks at me with those eyes, it chills me. There is something about him that is so demonic. And I mean, tragically, this young woman, she would be right. She was basically looking the devil in the eye with this man. So then on April the 5th of 1918, Henri yet again takes her to Gambais with a single ticket, one way, and she never returns. And as usual, Henri, he very quickly gets his hands on her assets, sells her furniture, makes himself a pretty penny, and then moves on to the next victim. And then lastly, we have Marie-Therese Marchadier. She was a 37-year-old boarding house owner from Bordeaux. She was also a woman who had dabbled in some sex work, and she was actually well known for her two adorable dogs. They were Belgian Griffons, which I don't even know if I've seen one of them. I'll look it up and I'll put it on the screen. But everyone just knew her for her dogs. When they seen her in the street, they knew who she was, even if she had her hood up, because they'd spot the dogs. This was a woman who was really struggling, hence the reason why she had engaged in some sex work. She was heavily in debt, and so she had contacted Henri in late 1918, and this was because she had an ad selling furniture, trying to get money, and Henri Landru, he was like, oh hey, I'll buy your furniture. I'll give you a pretty penny for your furniture. And Henri, ever the opportunist, he sees the perfect opening. And would you believe it? He goes to his wife. Oh yeah, he's still married, guys. Okay? All these mistresses are coming and going. He's still married to his cousin Marie Catherine. But he borrows money from his wife, possibly to go and buy Marie Therese's furniture, or at least act like he is going to. Now, when he meets up with Marie Therese, the two get to talking. He's charming as ever, and they very quickly get something going. On January the 9th of 1919, he would take her to Gambais. But Marie Therese, she did have this strong will, and she wasn't too keen right away to cohabit with him and sell her furniture. But he does all the charming. He promises her the world, and she decides, what could go wrong? Maybe this will be the life of my dreams, a life that I've always wanted. So she agrees that she's going to sell her furniture. They go back to Paris. She sells her furniture and receives 2,000 francs. Now, after she receives that money, Henri takes her right back to Gambais. One-way ticket, of course. When she was escorted back to Gambais on January the 13th, Henri, he was lugging 2 bags of coal, clearly prepared for what he was going to do. And this was the last that anyone had seen of Marie Therese. However, by January the 16th, neighbours, they start getting a whiff of something again. A nauseating, foul stench that seems to be wafting its way over from Henri Landru's chimney. And we all know that this is the grim signature of this monster's work. Now, thankfully, Henri Landru, his long, lucrative crime spree, it would finally hit a speed bump thanks to the stubbornness of some victims' families. Now, this would specifically be Marie Lacoste. She was a sister of Celestine Buisson, and then there was also Victorine Pilat, who was a sister of Anna Colomb. Now, these sisters, they weren't prepared to just let Henri Landru waltz off into the sunset after taking their sisters' lives. Now, after not receiving any communication from Celestine Buisson at Gambais, Lacoste had went straight to the top, or at least to the mayor of Gambais, but I mean, it's a good step. I'm glad she didn't just try and contact Henri to, get in touch, because he probably forged something to make it look like Celestine was still alive. I'm glad she went to someone who could actually help, or, at least should be able to help. But this mayor would be as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. She practically had to beg this mayor for help, which is just disgraceful when she's worried about her loved one. But the mayor, he eventually puts Marie in contact with Victorine. So Victorine and Marie, they meet up and they're putting their heads together. They're going through everything they know individually about their sisters and the men that they went away with. As they're comparing their notes and their descriptions of this man, they have a aha kind of moment, and they realise the aliases, Fremiet, Dupont, Goulet, they all pointed to the same man who looked exactly the same. So the women, they file missing persons reports for their sisters, and this gets the wheels of justice in motion. So this case, it lands on the desk of Inspector Jules Bellin of the Paris Brigade Mobile. Now, he would later take credit for cracking this case, but the real breakthrough, this came on April the 11th, 1919, and this was thanks to a friend of Lacoste, Laurie Bonheur, because she had spotted Henri Landru out shopping with a young woman on his arm. She spotted him immediately. She instantly recognised him, so she immediately goes and tells Lacoste, tips her off, tells her exactly where she had seen Henri. Then Lacoste, she wastes no time in contacting the inspector. So this inspector, he goes to where they were shopping and he snags a business card that Henri had left behind at the shop. And this business card was under the name of Lucien Goulier, which luckily for the inspector and everyone involved, this revealed his address. So they get the correct warrant, it's finally in hand. Bellin and 2 other officers, they swoop in, arrest Henri around midday on April the 12th of 1919. Now Henri, he doesn't go quiet, of course not. He is a showman that loves to perform. So he starts serenading this woman that he was seen shopping with. He's singing an aria from Massenet's opera, Manon. He's doing this as he's being escorted out of his home like some kind of loser, but he thinks he is the gift of God. He thinks this is charming. In the theatrics, if you think they're going to slow down in interrogations, you are completely wrong. He gets even more theatrical. So at first he starts off by protesting his innocence and also unwilling to give his name. And it was honestly like watching a man audition for a courtroom drama. I mean, it was just pathetic. Then when he finally admitted that he was in fact Henri Landru and none of the aliases that had been discovered, he says to the police, yes, I have aliases because I'm a fugitive. But being a fugitive doesn't make me a murderer. Well, no, Henry, but it also doesn't make you a great person. I mean, that's not a winning point to bring up. He had said, just because I am Landru does not make me a murderer. I don't know why I'm like, got the beauty blender like this. You'd think I was in the Opera Manon. He thought he was so clever, and he thought by being able to intelligently answer these questions or sarcastically answer them in a rhetorical way, that this would ward off the law. Now, when he was pressed about the women's whereabouts, all these women that he had been involved with, he had said, that's my affair. You do your job and I'll do mine. He then decides to invoke his right to silence, like a magician that's only willing to reveal half his trick, and he said, that is my secret. French law recognises the right to remain silent. And the police, thankfully, they're not so easily charmed by this man, okay? And they go through the motions. They would conduct large searches, and when they do, they discover very quickly that this was a fraudulent con man who had many aliases to trick women. Not only that, but he would find victims' clothing, furniture stashed in garages, and also very crucial documents. Birth and marriage certificates, bank details for Colombe and Buisson. But the piece de resistance would be his own little black notebook. The meticulously organised ledger of seduction and theft. And this whole thing read like a very, very twisted social calendar. He had it planned out to a T. Inside this ledger were financial accounts, records of meeting with 283 women through ads. 283, what the who's got the time? And chillingly, there was a list that had been narrowed down to 11 separate women who they presumed was this man's victims. There was 10 women and then André Couchet. Now, many of the women who were in this notebook in the midst of 283 names, most of them were found alive. But there would be many who would not be found. Now, the Gambais villa, that would be the only place that yielded the only physical evidence that even hinted at a murder. On April the 29th of 1919, police would recover 4.176 kilograms of calcined bone debris, 295 human bone fragments, 47 tiny teeth or fragments, plus there was scraps of cloth and buttons, all buried under a shed or inside the kitchen oven. Now, forensic expert Dr. Charles Paul, he determined that these fragments had come from at least 3 skeletons. But because there wasn't any pelvic bones, they couldn't even identify the sex at this point or who the bones had belonged to. And of course, not being able to identify these bodies, this was like a thorn in the side of prosecutors. Now, Henri Landru, and I don't know how it happened, but he would turn up during these searches, during them finding bone fragments, and he would mock the investigators. He thought he was so frickin' slick. He was turning these investigations into his own personal spectacle, lapping up every moment, enjoying it. Now, garden excavations, they would take place as well, but they only unearthed the bones of 2 dogs. He had claimed that these belonged to Marchadier and that he had killed them with her request. And honestly, this was a twist I did not see coming. But investigators, they quickly learned that crime was kind of like a family thing. Because Henry's child, Charles, you remember him? I think he was like the last born. He was somewhat of an accomplice to Henry. He had been helping to move the victim's furniture, and he also confirmed to police that he had been doing some gardening work at Vernouillet, and this was specifically around the time of Couchet's disappearance. Now, the eldest son, Maurice, he would be caught with the jewellery of Jeanne Couchet. This had been gifted to him by Henry, but Maurice, he had also helped to concoct this cover-up story for the disappearance of Anna Colombe. And then his wife, Marie Catherine, the cousin, she wasn't innocent either. She lived under the alias of Fremiet. Not only this, but she had forged signatures for Celestine Buisson and also Louise Jouam. She had done this so they could access their bank accounts. Now, she did claim that she was completely oblivious to any murderous detail. You know, she was only dabbling in the fraud aspect. I don't believe that for a second. I honestly, truly do not. Now, Maurice and Marie Catherine, they would be arrested in December of 1919, but they would be released by July of 1920. Now, it was said that this was probably because trying to prove that they knew more than just the thefts, that might be too difficult for a jury. Charles, meanwhile, he never faced a single charge. He was free to live a normal life with the family secret. So, it would be November the 7th of 1921 when Henri Landru, his moment in the spotlight would finally arrive, and that moment was at his trial. His trial would open in the Assize Court in Versailles, and honestly, what a show this was. It was like circus mode activated. It is actually said that the media, they were encouraged to report on this trial to try and keep focus off the peace conference that was currently going on. Now, word spread fast about this case and about this trial, and on a daily basis, there was hundreds, dozens of spectators just rolling on in, wanting to see a bit of the Landru special. Yes, that's what it was dubbed. The courtroom itself was always overflowing. A lot of the time it was doubled in capacity. A lot of it was curious onlookers, but there was the odd celebrity who was in there who clearly had a taste for scandal. Now, Henri, for his part, he was able to play this gentlemanly villain to perfection. He was calm, he was polite, he was witty, and he constantly denied these murder charges. And the thing that made him believable to a lot of people was the fact that although he was denying these murder charges, he was very open and honest about his fraud. He would offer his seat to ladies in the courtroom who weren't able to sit down. He would crack these clever retorts, and somehow he was turning this serial murder trial into a public spectacle. He was almost trying to make it a laughingstock. And it's just so freaking disrespectful to the victims in the case that he's behaving this way. And not only that, but that the court and the media, they are all seeming to allow this. He even had fans. Yes, apparently it's not only in today's day and age where murderers have fans, which is so freaking weird. Like, if you're a fan of a murderer, get a life. Or lock yourself up, because quite clearly, something's no right up here. But fans would send him gifts. He was getting tobacco, sweets, some were even sending marriage proposals. And in the 1919 elections, nearly 4,000 voters had scribbled his name on their ballots. There was no denying to the public that this man had charisma. But his charisma came with a body count. Now, despite the public's judgment and the people who believed that this man was guilty, the prosecution, they were really struggling without any concrete evidence. They had stated that the bone fragments, they were circumstantial at best because they couldn't be directly linked to any of the missing women. They were relying heavily on testimony from Jeanne Couchet's sister, and her sister had insisted that Jeanne would never ever leave her prized possessions behind. That just wasn't in her character. They had also relied on neighbours who came forward and discussed the disgusting smell that was wafting into their homes from this weirdo's chimney. Now, other witnesses had said that they had seen Henri Landru disposing of items in ponds and apparently in places where flesh had turned up. So then we come to Henry's defence lawyer. This man was a renowned attorney. Now, his lawyer actually said that he believed that Landru was guilty. Guilty as sin, possibly even insane. But his mission in this case, if he couldn't get him off completely, was at least to help him avoid the guillotine. And his strategy was masterful. He focused on the lack of any definitive proof, any definitive concrete evidence. He was suggesting that the jury could only really convict him on fraud. He also ruthlessly dissected the police investigation and honestly made a mockery of them. He continued to point out the inconsistencies, he highlighted the forensic ambiguity, and he even floated around an idea that Landru wasn't exactly a murderer, but he might have ran a white slave ring. I don't know why he would think that would make people think better of Landru, but I mean, I'm not an attorney. But the reason he came up with this was because that would explain why women potentially might have been sent abroad. And again, like, that's no better, but somehow this guy thought it was. His attorney would even go on to lie, stating that his victims had been found and that they would be brought in to testify in court. Is this allowed? He was saying that these victims were going to turn up any minute, enter the court and testify in Landru's defence. And the spectators, they all turned toward the door. They're waiting on these victims to walk in. And then the attorney, he's like, haha, see, you have doubt. I mean, like what? This man himself, he was turning this whole thing into a spectacle alongside his loser client, loser Landru. Thankfully, this charm, the clever arguments, the spectacle that they put on, they weren't enough, because after 3 hours of deliberation, on November the 30th of 1921, the jury would return a 9-3 majority verdict. And that verdict was guilty in all 11 counts of murder. Thank goodness, because for a second I had doubt. Now, they had unanimously convicted him on most of the theft charges, and Landru's defence attorney Morrow, he had managed to persuade the jurors to sign a clemency petition. But Henri, ever defiant and stubborn, he did not want this. He refused it at first, declaring, "The tribunal has made a mistake. I have never killed anyone. This is my final protest." Oh no, I'm so scared, Henri. And the showman, his final curtain was near and he was determined to go out on his own terms. But in the end, even Henri Landru, this man known for his charm, even he couldn't talk his way out of the ultimate consequence. Because he eventually did sign this clemency appeal. But President Alexandre Millerand, he wasn't buying it. And that meant that on February the 25th of 1922, Henri Landru would face the guillotine. And true to his usual form, he rejected any last rites, he refused any strong alcohol, and he turned down the opportunity of a final confession. He had instead told the priest to save his own soul. Now, his final request, depending on which story you read, was either a glass of rum and water or a foot bath. Who's going to come in and scrub those feet? Now, the guillotine itself, ironically, this was named the Widow, which honestly seems cruelly appropriate. So once he had been executed, his body would be buried in Cimetière des Sonnards, only later to be moved to an unmarked grave when the lease expired. So this weirdo, unmarked grave, and that is all he deserved. Actually, he didn't even deserve that. Now, when it came to his execution, a lot of people wanted to see it, believe me. There was like people who were lining up all night. There was women who had been out at Parisian nightclubs who turned up in their evening dresses, all drawn by this morbid curiosity. But obviously only officials and journalists got in to see anything. Now, someone by the name of Webb Miller, they were reporting on the event, and they earned a Pulitzer? Pulitzer? How do you say it? But they received this nomination for being able to capture the moment in chilling detail. And I'm going to read a little excerpt to you. Apologies, as you can see the makeup has moved on but the story has not, and that is because my memory card was full. So I had to upload everything from this to my laptop and then basically delete everything off the camera and then get going again. So I'm just going to read this excerpt again because I did start it before, but I don't want there to be like half of it with the makeup before then half of it with this one. I know you don't even care, but let's read it now. Landru's bare feet made a light sound on the cold pebbles. His knees seemed not to be doing their job. His face turned red when he saw the terrifying machine, the guillotine. The blade fell in an instant, and Landru's head fell into the basket with a dull thud. An assistant lifted the hinged board and rolled the headless torso into a wicker basket, and a sickening amount of blood gushed out. One of the assistants standing in front of the machine grabbed the basket containing the head, rolled it like a cabbage into another large basket, and quickly loaded it onto a waiting, covered cart. When Landru appeared in the prison courtyard, I checked my watch. When the cart left, I looked at my watch again, but only 26 seconds had passed. I mean, that's kind of insane. 26 seconds, 1 minute you're alive, and then less than 30 seconds later you're not. Even after this monster's death, all his possessions, they were like auctioned off. People were desperate to get their hands on them. His villa even became like this attraction, you could say. A morbid attraction, of course, but people were keen to visit where this monster had taken his victims. Now, that infamous oven, the one that he used to basically incinerate his victims, that would be auctioned off. And there was an Italian man who paid 40,000 lire for this oven. The oven that had claimed so many lives, or at least destroyed their bodies. I think that is so sick and twisted. See, when people get like serial killer memorabilia, Henri Landru's influence, for lack of a better word, but his influence made its way across the world. Do you know the serial killer John Haig, the one from the 1940s that dissolved his victims in sulfuric acid? He had taken inspiration from Henri Landru. Now, there has been possible remains that could potentially be linked back to Landru that have continued to surface decades later. There were skeletons of a young woman from Saint Denis in 1933, and then partial skeletons discovered in Gambais in 1958. These are believed to possibly be linked to Jeanne Couchette and her son. And for any truly morbid tourists out there who wants to see a human head, Henri Landru, apparently his decapitated head, sits in the Museum of Death in Hollywood, California. So I mean, you know, if you're in California or you're nearby, and if you want to see this scumbag's head, then that's what it is. Even in the modern era, this monster in history, he refuses to fade quietly. Forever the charming, calculated, utterly chilling con man who turns seduction into a deadly business, leaving a trail of fire, fraud, and fascination behind him. This video today is of course dedicated to the victims of this monster, of this case. I just want their voices to be heard and their stories to be told, and have a way to memorialise them and have people remember their story. This is one that I've barely seen covered, if seen covered at all, and it just felt really important to do it. But my thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and the victims' families, and I do hope that wherever those victims are today, that they're resting peacefully. But my loves, that is it for this true crime and makeup episode. I really hope this one was interesting to you, and hopefully for some of you it might be a new case. If you do enjoy my content, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Make sure that notification bell is on so you don't miss when I upload. Please also, if you don't mind, because I'm begging you, please hype this video up. Use your hype points on me. I'm here twice a week every single week, and I don't plan on leaving you anytime soon. And it would be lovely to grow this community, do it full time, get more content out for you, and it would honestly just mean the entire world to me. Any details you need regarding me, myself and I, they can all be found listed down below. Don't forget, your case suggestions can be left in the comments. I go through all the comments, every single case suggestion. They do get added to my big massive long list that I'm gradually working my way through, so you can leave them there, or you can send me a DM on Instagram, or even an email if you would prefer. But that is it for today. Please remember, be a good person, do not be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!